Harper Ellis hadn't planned on spending Christmas in a mountain cabin, much less the same cabin where her last relationship had fallen apart 2 years earlier. She had promised herself she would never return, but life had a habit of dragging her back into unfinished stories. As she stepped out of her car, boots crunching in the snow, the air smelled of pine and cold memories. Mila, her best friend and self-appointed emotional supervisor, had insisted this trip would heal her seasonal trauma. Harper doubted it. The cabin looked exactly the same: dark wood, frosted windows, that porch railing Rowan once painted red for no logical reason. Harper sighed, already regretting agreeing to this plan. Mila had driven up in her own car and was unloading bags with the enthusiasm of a kid on Christmas morning. Harper envied her ability to be excited about anything. The road behind them twisted downward, vanishing into the woods, giving the illusion they were completely cut off from the world. Harper stood still a moment longer, letting the cold pinch her cheeks, grounding herself as she tried to forget how many times she'd laughed, argued, and kissed Rowan on that porch. Mila nudged her gently and said, "Don't overthink it. It's just a cabin. And you're a grown woman." Harper wanted to believe that. She really did. Inside, the cabin warmed quickly once Mila lit the fireplace. The glow cast dancing shadows across the wooden walls, adding a sense of nostalgia Harper didn't ask for. She ran her fingertips across the mantel. Everything was as she remembered: the crooked picture frame, the hand-stitched quilt draped over the couch, the vintage snow globe Rowan once claimed had magical powers. Harper sat down, trying to settle into the moment, but every detail felt like a ghost tugging at her sleeve. Mila set 2 mugs of hot chocolate on the coffee table and offered a soft smile, aware of the emotional landmines hidden everywhere. They were supposed to meet the property manager to pick up the extra keys, but he was running late due to an incoming snowstorm. Harper checked her phone for the 10th time, trying to distract herself with meaningless notifications. The wind outside howled against the windows, rattling the glass just enough to add tension to the room. Mila paced around, humming to herself, unaware that Harper's nerves were tightening with every passing second. Harper kept repeating in her head, "Rowan won't be here. Rowan is gone. This is just a retreat." But doubts clawed at her rational mind. Life rarely blessed her with scenarios this simple. When a car finally pulled up outside, Harper assumed it was the property manager. She walked to the window, expecting a middle-aged man with paperwork and a poor attitude. Instead, her breath froze halfway through her lungs. The headlights illuminated a familiar figure stepping out of a dark SUV, bundled in a thick coat, scarf, and the effortless confidence Harper remembered all too well. Rowan Blake, the woman she once loved fiercely, and the same woman she couldn't forgive. Mila rushed to Harper's side, whispering, "Is that?" Harper nodded, unable to tear her gaze away. Panic curled in her stomach. Rowan didn't notice them at first. She trudged through the snow, shaking off flurries as she approached the porch steps. Harper's heartbeat kicked into a frantic rhythm, like her chest had forgotten how to function. Mila mouthed, "What is she doing here?" Harper had no answer. Rowan looked up, her eyes locking with Harper's through the window. For a second, time folded in on itself, and all the anger, affection, and unresolved tension flared in Harper's chest. Rowan's expression shifted: surprise, confusion, and something Harper couldn't quite identify. Maybe regret. Maybe hope. Maybe both. By the time Rowan stepped into the cabin, the silence had become unbearable. Snow clung to her dark hair, melting slowly down the collar of her coat. She offered a tight, polite smile, one Harper instantly recognized as her "trying not to cause problems" expression. "Apparently," Rowan said carefully, "the property manager double-booked the cabin, and the storm just blocked the road." Mila's eyes widened, but Harper felt everything inside her go still. Of all the cabins in the mountains, of all the weeks in the year, Christmas had forced them together again. Rowan looked between the two women and added, barely above a whisper, "Looks like we're stuck together." Harper stood frozen in the center of the living room, unsure whether to speak, breathe, or collapse into the nearest cushion. The storm outside intensified, beating against the windows like a warning from nature itself. Rowan removed her gloves slowly, deliberately, avoiding Harper's gaze the way someone avoids stepping on cracked ice. Mila, sensing the emotional tension thickening like fog, offered an awkward half-smile and mumbled something about checking the generator in the back. Harper knew Mila was pretending to have a purpose. The cabin didn't even have a generator. But she appreciated the escape route all the same, even if it left her alone with the woman she'd once sworn she'd never face again. Rowan inhaled sharply before speaking again, her voice steady but undeniably strained. "I'm sorry to barge in like this. I swear I didn't know you two were here." Harper wanted to believe her, to trust that this wasn't another one of Rowan's impulsive decisions disguised as coincidence. But the cabin itself felt like a reminder of all the ways Rowan's promises had once unraveled. Harper crossed her arms, partly for warmth and partly to keep herself from reaching for the woman who still had too much gravity in her orbit. "It's fine," she managed, though it wasn't. Rowan's eyes softened at the brittle tone, but she didn't push. Snow continued piling up outside, erasing any hope of escape. Mila returned far too quickly to have checked anything but her own nerves. She clapped her hands together and announced brightly, "Well, looks like we're officially snowed in. Cozy, right?" Harper sent her a glare that communicated nothing about this as cozy, but Mila simply shrugged and went to busy herself with the fireplace. Rowan remained by the door, as if unsure whether she was welcome to take another step. The hesitation was so unlike her. Rowan had always carried herself with quiet confidence, that Harper felt a pang of something she didn't want to name. Eventually, Rowan slipped off her coat and hung it on the same hook she used to claim, without asking. The familiarity of the gesture twisted inside Harper like an old wound reopening. Rowan brushed snow from her hair, revealing the same dark waves Harper once loved running her hands through. Mila pretended not to notice the emotional minefield, pulling out board games as if they weren't three adults trapped in a pressure cooker of unresolved heartbreak. Harper forced herself to sit on the edge of the couch, maintaining a safe distance from Rowan, whose presence sparked unwelcome warmth beneath her skin. Trying to divert attention from a storm inside the cabin, Mila joked, "So, Rowan's still terrible at card games?" Rowan let out a soft laugh, one Harper had missed more than she cared to admit. "Only when Harper cheats," she said, glancing quickly in Harper's direction before looking away again. The air shifted in a way neither woman could ignore, heavy with shared history and carefully buried affection. Harper stared at the snow globe on the table instead, its swirling flakes reflecting like tiny ghosts of the past. Mila watched the exchange with wide eyes, silently mouthing, "This is going to be a disaster." Rowan eventually settled onto the armchair across from Harper, keeping just enough distance to appear respectful, but not enough to feel detached. "I'll sleep on the couch," she offered. "Or the floor. Whatever makes things less complicated." Harper's lips tightened. She hated that Rowan always defaulted to martyrdom when she felt guilty. "The cabin has 2 bedrooms," Harper replied. "We're adults. We can manage." The words tasted easier than the truth. Rowan nodded, clearly relieved but still tense. Mila clapped her hands again, desperate to diffuse the building tension. "See? Look at us. Mature, reasonable, emotionally functional human beings." But Harper and Rowan both knew the illusion of functional wouldn't last long. The cabin had a way of dredging up memories. They lingered in the walls, in the floorboards, in the creak of the staircase Rowan used to climb at midnight when she couldn't sleep. As the fire crackled, Harper felt the weight of the unsaid pressing heavily on her chest. She couldn't ignore that fate, coincidence, or plain bad luck had thrown them together for a reason. Rowan leaned back in the chair, exhaling slowly, her gaze dropping to the floor. The storm trapped them, but their past was what truly held them hostage. And the night was only beginning. Dinner was a chaotic collaboration none of them had planned for. The pantry held only basics: pasta, canned tomatoes, and a suspiciously old bag of marshmallows. Mila took charge like a contestant on a cooking show no one had asked her to host, while Harper chopped vegetables with aggressive precision. Rowan hovered near the counter, unsure whether to help or keep her distance. Every time she reached for something, Harper stepped away, as if proximity alone might ignite something too volatile to control. Mila noticed, shooting Harper a warning glance that said, "You're not helping." But the truth was, Harper didn't know how to help. Not when her past was standing 2 feet behind her, breathing softly, like an unanswered question. As the sauce simmered, Rowan took a seat at the small wooden table, tracing the grooves carved by decades of visitors. She remembered carving her initials under the tabletop one summer, a reckless act she'd sworn Harper would never find out about. Harper, of course, noticed the carving the same day and teased her relentlessly, kissing her afterward as if secrets were simply invitations to get closer. Rowan swallowed the memory before it reached her expression. Harper kept her back turned, but Rowan's presence pressed against her awareness like a hand on her spine, steady, familiar, impossible to ignore. When they finally sat down to eat, the tension at the table felt almost tangible. Mila made a valiant effort to fill the silence with light chatter, updates about work, a funny story about her neighbor's runaway parrot, even a dramatic retelling of a grocery store fight over the last box of candy canes. But each topic fizzled as soon as it began, unable to compete with the unspoken history crackling like static between Harper and Rowan. Harper pushed pasta around her plate, pretending she wasn't hyper-aware of Rowan's gaze, flicking toward her every few minutes. Rowan ate quietly, as though afraid any sudden movement might trigger an emotional avalanche. Eventually, it was Mila who forced the inevitable. "Okay," she said, dropping her fork with the determination of someone starting an intervention. "We're all adults, which means we can handle a basic conversation without combusting, right? Harper or Rowan, someone start talking about literally anything." Harper glared at her friend, but Rowan let out a small, amused exhale. Mila pointed between them like a referee. "Go on. One of you say something honest." Harper's chest tightened. The last time she'd asked Rowan for honesty, she'd walked away heartbroken. Rowan folded her hands on the table, clearly debating whether to speak or stay silent forever. Rowan took a careful breath. "I didn't come here to make things worse," she began, her voice softer than Harper remembered. "I booked this cabin because it used to make me feel at peace." Harper frowned at that. Peace was the last thing she associated with their breakup. Rowan's gaze drifted to the window, where snow spiraled like falling stars. "I thought I'd be alone. I didn't expect to see you here, Harper. But I'm not going to pretend it doesn't bring up a lot." Harper felt heat rising to her cheeks. Anger, nostalgia, and confusion swirled together in a way she couldn't untangle. Mila, for once, remained silent. Harper forced herself to answer, even though her instincts screamed at her to retreat. "It brings up a lot for me too," she admitted, fingers curling tightly around her fork. "But that doesn't mean I want to rehash everything." Rowan nodded, accepting the boundary even though disappointment flickered faintly in her expression. "I'm not asking to," Rowan replied. "I just want this to be bearable. For both of us." Mila exhaled loudly, relieved that the conversation hadn't spiraled into disaster. Harper looked down at her plate, wondering when Rowan had learned to speak without defensiveness, without walls, without the impulse to control every outcome. After dinner, the three of them worked together to clean the kitchen, though together mostly meant Mila bustling around while Harper and Rowan danced to silent, careful choreography of avoidance. Every time Harper reached for a plate, Rowan stepped back. Every time Rowan moved to grab a towel, Harper turned away. The space between them felt magnetic and repulsive all at once, tugging them closer only to push them apart. When Mila finally announced she was heading to bed early, Harper felt a moment of panic. Rowan lingered in the doorway, unsure if she should stay or retreat to her room. The fire crackled behind them, and Harper realized the night wasn't going to let either of them hide much longer. When Mila disappeared down the hall, Harper found herself alone with Rowan for the first time that evening. The silence was thick enough to feel physical, settling between them like a blanket they didn't ask for. Rowan remained near the doorway, hands tucked awkwardly in the pockets of her sweater, as if she feared moving any closer might expose something she wasn't ready to confront. Harper busied herself by adjusting pillows on the couch, even though they didn't need adjusting, pretending the domestic task shielded her from the tangle of emotions pressing at her ribs. Rowan cleared her throat softly, a sound Harper knew too well, and Harper felt her stomach tighten. "You don't have to avoid me," Rowan said quietly, taking a tentative step into the living room. Her voice carried an unexpected vulnerability, stripping away the confident persona she used to wear like armor. Harper hesitated before responding, unsure if she could trust what she heard. "I'm not avoiding you," she lied, her fingers smoothing the same pillow again and again. Rowan gave her a small, knowing smile. "You always touch things when you're uncomfortable." The familiarity of the observation made Harper freeze. Rowan's eyes softened, not with pity but with recognition, a reminder they once knew each other better than anyone else. Harper finally forced herself to sit on the couch, grounding her feet against the rug to steady her nerves. Rowan approached slowly, as if waiting for permission before sitting in the armchair across from her. "I didn't mean to bring anything up at dinner," Rowan said, her voice steady but threaded with sincerity. "I'm not here to dredge up old wounds." Harper studied her carefully, searching for cracks, for signs of the impulsive, unpredictable woman she remembered. But Rowan seemed different, calmer, more deliberate, as though the past 2 years had reshaped her into someone Harper didn't quite know anymore. That unfamiliarity scared her more than the old memories. The fire popped loudly, sending a spray of sparks up the chimney. Rowan glanced toward it before continuing. "I know I hurt you," she said, speaking with a quiet bravery that unsettled Harper more than anger ever could. "And I've replayed it 1,000 times, wondering how I could have handled things differently." Harper's jaw tightened. She wasn't ready for an apology, not when her heart still flinched at the thought of their breakup. "We don't need to do this," she said stiffly. Rowan nodded, accepting the boundary without protest. But the truth hung between them anyway, unspoken yet undeniable. Rowan's voice dropped lower, almost hesitant. "I changed a lot after we ended," she admitted. "I had to." Harper frowned slightly, caught off guard by the admission. Rowan's gaze drifted to her hands, fingers intertwining nervously, another unfamiliar behavior. The Rowan Harper remembered was bold, impulsive, reckless with her emotions. This version was measured, almost fragile. Harper wasn't sure which one scared her more. She leaned back on the couch, unsure whether she wanted to close the distance or build more walls. "People change," Harper said carefully, not ready to offer more insight than that. A gust of wind slammed against the cabin, rattling the windows hard enough to draw both their attention. Snow pressed thick against the panes, sealing them off from the outside world. Rowan let out a slow exhale. "Looks like we're truly stuck here," she murmured. Harper forced a small laugh. "Yeah, Christmas magic at its finest." The attempt at humor softened something in Rowan's expression, not joy, exactly, but a flicker of warmth. For a moment, the bitterness of their past felt distant, replaced by a fragile, uncertain peace. Harper didn't trust it, but she didn't push it away either. As the night stretched on, Harper realized she was exhausted. Not just from the long day, but from the emotional tightrope she'd been walking since Rowan arrived. She stood, rubbing her hands over her face. "I'm heading to bed," she said. Rowan nodded, rising slowly as if afraid any sudden movement might shatter the tenuous calm between them. "Good night, Harper." The simplicity of her voice tugged unexpectedly at Harper's chest. She hesitated before responding, then forced out a quiet, "Good night." She retreated down the hallway, leaving Rowan in the glow of the firelight, alone, thoughtful, and carrying the weight of a past neither of them had fully outrun. Harper shut the bedroom door behind her and leaned against it, pressing her palms flat against the wood as if steadying herself after a storm. The room was dimly lit by a small bedside lamp, casting soft golden light across walls she once decorated with Rowan during a summer trip that now felt like another lifetime. She sat on the edge of the bed, exhaling shakily. She hated that Rowan's presence still stirred something raw and unguarded inside her. She hated that 2 years hadn't been enough to quiet the sense of familiarity Rowan carried with every glance, every quiet breath. Harper buried her face in her hands, wishing sleep would come quickly and erase the whirlwind of emotions. But sleep did not come quickly. Harper lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled creaks of the cabin settling under the weight of snow. Somewhere down the hall, Rowan moved quietly, footsteps that were unmistakable, even after so long. Harper's chest tightened at the realization that her body still recognized Rowan's patterns, the rhythm of her movements, the soft hesitations in her steps. It was infuriating. And worse, it was comforting. She rolled over, pulling the blanket tightly around herself, as if it could shield her from the memories crawling back into her thoughts one by one. In her own room, Rowan sat on the floor beside the bed, too restless to sleep. She rubbed her palms together, trying to warm her fingers, though the room wasn't cold. It was nerves, something she hadn't expected to feel so intensely. She'd rehearsed what she might say to Harper if she ever saw her again, but nothing she imagined matched the reality of sharing the same cabin, the same air, the same unspoken tension that hummed like electricity between them. She rested her head against the mattress, eyes closed, whispering to herself, "Just don't mess this up." But deep down, Rowan knew the situation was already unraveling in ways she couldn't control. At some point, both women drifted into uneasy sleep, only to be jolted awake hours later by a violent crack of thunder that shook the cabin. Harper sat upright instantly, heart pounding. She threw off the covers and stepped toward the doorway, driven more by instinct than thought. Rowan appeared at the exact same moment from her bedroom, hair tousled, eyes wide with confusion and worry. They nearly collided in the hallway. "Power's out," Rowan said, her voice low but steady. Harper nodded, noticing the faint blue glow of snow filtering through the windows, illuminating Rowan's face like a half-remembered dream. They walked together to the living room, both tense, both trying not to read too deeply into the circumstances, forcing them side by side in the dark. The fire had died down to embers, leaving the cabin cloaked in icy silence. Harper crouched beside the fireplace, stacking logs with practiced ease while Rowan knelt opposite her. Their hands brushed accidentally, a quick, fleeting touch that sent a sharp pulse of awareness through both of them. Harper tried to ignore the warmth that sparked from the contact. Rowan tried to steady her breathing. The silence carried more weight than any words could. When the fire finally caught, its glow spread through the room, softening the sharp edges of the night. Harper sat back on her heels, watching flames rise and settle. Rowan remained across from her, their knees only a foot apart. "You always knew how to make a fire last," Rowan said softly, a hint of admiration in her voice. Harper looked away, unsure how to accept a compliment from someone who once left her broken-hearted. "I remember things," she murmured. Rowan's expression shifted, something fragile, almost hopeful. For a heartbeat, neither moved, trapped in the delicate gravity pulling them closer. Before either of them could speak, Milo emerged from the hallway, wrapped in a blanket that trailed behind her like a tired ghost. "Okay, who summoned the thunder gods?" she mumbled, squinting at them through sleepy eyes. Harper and Rowan instantly leaned back, putting distance between themselves as though caught doing something forbidden. Mila arched a suspicious eyebrow but said nothing, instead lowering herself dramatically onto the couch. "If the power doesn't come back soon, I'm declaring this a survival movie," she grumbled. Harper and Rowan exchanged a quick glance, one filled with tension, reluctance, and the quiet acknowledgement that the night had shifted something neither was ready to face. The storm raged through the early morning hours, thunder rolling over the mountains like distant drums. Mila drifted back to sleep on the couch almost instantly, cocooned in her blanket fortress. Harper and Rowan, however, remained awake, sitting near the fire that now flickered steadily, casting warm light across the wooden walls. Harper pulled her knees up to her chest, staring into the flames, while Rowan watched the snow swirling outside the windows. The silence between them wasn't hostile anymore, just heavy, filled with things neither dared to say. It felt strange, Harper realized, to sit this close to Rowan and feel both comforted and terrified at the same time. Eventually, Rowan broke the quiet. Remember the last time we were here? She asked softly, eyes still fixed on the window. Harper stiffened, surprised by the question. Of course she remembered. They'd spent a week in this cabin 2 years ago, trying to repair what was already breaking. Harper hesitated before answering.
Yeah.
I remember. Rowan glanced toward her, reading the tension in her posture. I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable, she added gently. I think about that trip a lot. Harper's jaw tightened. She thought about it too, far more often than she admitted, even if the memories were tangled in a mix of warmth and heartbreak. Rowan leaned back against the wall, folding her arms loosely as she exhaled. I was terrible at communicating back then. I know that. I let fear make decisions for me. Harper looked over, caught off guard by the honesty in Rowan's voice. You shut me out, Harper said quietly, the words slipping out before she could soften them. Rowan nodded without hesitation.
I did.
And I'm sorry for that. Harper blinked, surprised by how readily Rowan admitted it. The Rowan she remembered would have deflected, argued, or made excuses. This Rowan simply accepted the truth, letting the weight of it settle between them. For a moment, Harper felt something inside her crack, something brittle she'd held onto for far too long. She watched Rowan carefully, searching her expression for insincerity, for signs of the old patterns. But Rowan looked steady, her gaze steady and open. I wasn't perfect either, Harper finally admitted. I was so afraid of losing you that I didn't say what I needed. I kept trying to fix everything alone. Rowan lowered her head slightly, absorbing the words with quiet gratitude. We were young, she murmured, and scared, and stubborn. A faint smile tugged at her lips. Mostly stubborn. Harper let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. I don't want to rewrite the past, she said. But I needed to hear that you understood what happened. Rowan met her eyes, and for the first time since arriving, she didn't look tense or uncertain. She looked present. I do understand, Rowan said softly. And I regret hurting you. Even now. Harper felt her heartbeat stutter, not with pain this time, but with something gentler. The fire crackled, punctuating the moment with a warmth that seeped into the space between them. Harper looked away first, overwhelmed by the weight of Rowan's sincerity. A soft thud outside made both women glance toward the window. Snow continued to fall in thick sheets, turning the world into a blur of white. We're definitely not getting out today, Harper murmured. Rowan nodded, stretching her legs out toward the fire. Maybe that's not the worst thing. Harper shot her a questioning look, but Rowan didn't elaborate. Instead, she reached for a blanket draped over the side of the couch and tossed the edge toward Harper. You look cold, Rowan said simply. Harper hesitated before taking it, aware that the gesture felt far more intimate than Rowan likely intended. Still, she pulled the blanket around her, grateful for the warmth. They sat like that for a long while, separated only by a few feet and enough emotional history to fill the cabin twice over. Harper watched the flames, feeling the tightness in her chest ease ever so slightly. Rowan rested her head back against the wall, eyes half closed but still alert, as if afraid of drifting into a dream where things felt too easy. When Mila eventually stirred on the couch, mumbling incoherently about ghost reindeer, Harper and Rowan exchanged a quiet laugh. It was small, almost hesitant, but it cracked the ice between them more effectively than any conversation. For the first time that night, Harper felt the possibility, small, fragile, uncertain, of something shifting between them. By late morning, the storm had calmed just enough for pale light to seep through the snow-packed windows. Mila finally woke fully, stretching with the dramatic flair of someone who firmly believed she deserved applause for surviving a night on the couch. Okay, she announced, rubbing her eyes. What did I miss? Emotional breakthroughs? Secret confessions? Anyone kiss? Harper nearly choked on the tea she'd been sipping. Rowan turned an impressive shade of pink. Mila squinted at both of them suspiciously before shrugging. Fine, be mysterious. But I'll find out eventually. Harper shot her a warning look, but Mila only grinned wider, delighted by the tension she could practically taste in the air. After breakfast, An improvised meal of oatmeal and melted chocolate chips. They all worked together to shovel the snow blocking the front door. Mila's approach to the task involved more complaining than actual shoveling. Rowan carved out clean, even paths, and Harper attacked the snow with a determination that suggested she was trying to win a personal vendetta against winter itself. At one point, Harper slipped slightly, and Rowan instinctively reached out to steady her. Their eyes met, breath visible in the freezing air, a moment of déjà vu so strong Harper felt her pulse stutter. She stepped back quickly, murmuring a quiet thanks, while Rowan lowered her hand slowly, as if releasing something she wasn't ready to let go of. Once they managed to clear enough snow to open the door fully, the three retreated inside, shivering and breathless. Mila wrapped herself dramatically in 2 blankets and declared she was retiring from manual labor forever. Harper rolled her eyes but felt a tiny smile tug at her lips. Rowan, brushing snow from her hair, glanced toward Harper with a softness that made Harper's stomach flip. The cabin warmed gradually as the fire rebuilt its strength, filling the space with a quiet coziness that contrasted the icy world outside. Harper found herself breathing easier, though she wasn't sure if it was the heat or Rowan. As the afternoon stretched lazily ahead of them, Rowan pulled out an old deck of cards they'd found in the kitchen drawer. Mila insisted on teaching them a game she dubbed Holiday Roulette, which was essentially an excuse for her to make up rules every 2 minutes. Harper usually hated games with no structure, but watching Rowan try and fail to follow Mila's chaotic logic was strangely entertaining. At one point, Rowan threw her hands up in defeat, laughing in a way Harper hadn't seen since before the breakup. The sound hit Harper directly in the chest, warm and familiar. Mila noticed the shift in Harper's expression but said nothing, choosing instead to escalate her rule-making nonsense. When Mila excused herself to take a long shower, finally surrendering the living room, Harper and Rowan remained seated on opposite sides of the coffee table. The cards were scattered everywhere. The fire crackled behind them, and the soft hush of the wind outside made the moment feel almost suspended in time. Rowan picked up a bent card and smoothed it absent-mindedly. "You're different," Harper said before she could stop herself. Rowan looked up, startled. "In a good way," Harper added, though she wasn't sure why she felt the need to soften the statement. Rowan's expression shifted, flicker of surprise, then gratitude, then something deeper she didn't voice. "I had to grow up," Rowan said quietly, setting the card down. "After everything fell apart, I realized I'd been living like nothing could touch me. Like consequences were optional." Harper listened, her fingers tracing idle patterns along the tabletop. Rowan continued, "I didn't handle us the way you deserved. I know that now." Harper felt a familiar ache rise in her chest, not the sharp pain from before, but something gentler and sadder. "I wasn't perfect either," she admitted softly. "I kept waiting for you to give me something you didn't know how to give." Rowan's eyes darkened with recognition, and the honesty between them felt like stepping onto thin ice, dangerous, but strangely necessary. Silence settled, but it was no longer the static-filled, brittle quiet from earlier days. This one felt deliberate, like both women were giving each other space to process rather than retreat. Rowan shifted closer, not enough to invade Harper's space, but enough to make her presence feel intentional. "I'm not asking for anything," Rowan said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just want you to know I'm not the same person I was." Harper swallowed hard, pulse drifting into uneven territory. She wasn't sure what Rowan was hoping for, reconciliation, forgiveness, or simply acknowledgement, but the sincerity in her eyes made Harper's heart tilt dangerously. Before Harper could respond, Mila's voice echoed from the hallway. "Why is there no hot water?" abruptly shattering the moment into startled laughter. Harper stood frozen in the middle of the room after Rowan's confession, trying to steady her breathing as the words settled between them like falling snow. She hadn't expected Rowan to admit she still cared. She'd barely expected Rowan to speak more than a polite sentence this trip. The weight of everything they hadn't said over the years pressed down hard, tightening Harper's chest. Rowan watched her with that same mix of fear and hope, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of her flannel sleeve. The fire crackled softly beside them, filling the silence that neither woman dared break. Harper finally sat down, her legs trembling, realizing this was the moment she had both dreaded and longed for. Rowan took a cautious step closer, her voice barely above a whisper as she tried to explain the truth she had buried for so long. She talked about the breakup, the confusion, the pressure from her family, and the terror of realizing how deeply she'd loved Harper. Every word felt like an unraveling thread, exposing old wounds neither of them had treated properly. Harper listened, her heart twisting at the regret laced through Rowan's voice. She remembered the night they ended things, how Rowan wouldn't look at her, how she chose silence over honesty. Hearing the truth now, a truth filled with fear instead of indifference, was almost harder to bear. It made everything hurt in a newer, sharper way. When Rowan finished speaking, she looked exhausted, emotionally drained, as if she had run miles without moving an inch. Harper exhaled shakily, staring at her hands before lifting her gaze to meet Rowan's. She admitted how the breakup had shattered her, how she spent months replaying every moment wondering what she did wrong. The admission made her voice quiver, but she didn't hold back. Rowan's eyes softened with guilt, her expression crumpling in a way Harper had never seen. Harper realized they had both been carrying their pain alone, building entire stories in their heads instead of sharing the truth. And now, finally, they were untangling the past piece by fragile piece. The storm outside grew stronger, winds howling against the cabin walls as though echoing the turmoil inside. Harper found herself trembling again, but this time, not from fear. Rowan moved closer, slow enough for Harper to pull away if she wanted to, but Harper didn't. She let Rowan sit beside her, their shoulders brushing, sending sparks down Harper's spine. The warmth between them felt achingly familiar, like slipping back into a memory she'd tried to bury. Rowan's hand hovered inches from Harper's, uncertain and trembling, waiting for permission. Harper stared at their hands and, after a long breath, gently closed the distance. The moment their fingers intertwined, something in Rowan broke, a quiet, shaky exhale that sounded like relief. Harper felt the tightness in her chest ease just a little, as though touching Rowan unlocked something she had kept locked away too long. They didn't speak for several minutes, simply sitting together while the firelight flickered across their joined hands. Outside, the wind roared, but inside, a fragile peace settled over them. Harper knew this didn't fix everything. Years of hurt couldn't be undone in a single conversation. But it was a beginning, a small, fragile bridge where there once had been a chasm. Rowan finally turned to her, voice low and earnest, asking for a chance, not to erase the past, but to try again with honesty this time. She promised she wouldn't run, wouldn't hide behind fear or family expectations, not again. The vulnerability in her tone caught Harper off guard. It was the kind of raw honesty Rowan had never shared before. Harper felt her throat tighten as she searched Rowan's face for any sign of doubt, any shadow of the woman who once walked away. But all she saw was sincerity, steady and open. The realization made Harper's pulse quicken with something dangerously close to hope. Harper didn't answer right away. She needed time to think, to breathe, to make sure the longing she felt wasn't just nostalgia stirred up by snowstorms and old memories. Rowan nodded gently, understanding without needing an explanation. She squeezed Harper's hand once before letting go, giving Harper space instead of pressure. The gesture alone showed how much Rowan had changed. As Harper watched her move to the opposite side of the room, she realized something important. This time, Rowan wasn't asking her to leap into the unknown alone. She was offering to jump with her. And for the first time in years, the future didn't feel so terrifying. The rest of the afternoon unfolded in a strange, delicate calm, as if both women were afraid to shatter whatever fragile truce they had built. Harper busied herself in the small kitchen, pretending to organize the cupboards even though everything was already neatly arranged. Rowan stayed near the fireplace, adding logs, adjusting the flames, doing anything to keep her hands occupied. Every so often, their eyes met by accident, and each time, something warm flickered between them, soft, hesitant and undeniably there. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, but heavy with unspoken thoughts. Harper wondered if Rowan was thinking the same thing she was. How strange it felt to be near each other again, and how strangely right it felt too. As the storm intensified, the wind rattled the windows with a force that made the cabin tremble slightly. Rowan walked over to check the locks, and Harper couldn't help watching how naturally she moved through the space, as if she had always belonged there. Rowan glanced back at her and chuckled softly, saying the storm reminded her of the one during their first winter together. Harper's breath caught at the memory. The two of them wrapped in blankets, drinking hot cocoa, talking about futures they thought they'd share. The nostalgia tugged at her heart, both tender and painful. Rowan seemed to sense it because her smile faded into something gentler, more careful, as if she didn't want to push too far. Eventually Harper suggested they cook dinner together, partly to distract herself, partly because she couldn't stand the distance between them anymore. Rowan agreed immediately, almost too quickly, and joined her at the counter. They moved around each other awkwardly at first, brushing shoulders, reaching for the same utensils, laughing softly when they collided. But the awkwardness soon eased into something more familiar. Their rhythm returned, not perfectly, but enough to remind Harper of the woman she once knew so well. Rowan sliced vegetables while Harper stirred the pot, the simple domesticity warming more than just their hands. It felt good. Safe. And that scared Harper more than she wanted to admit. Dinner was quiet but comfortable, lit only by the fire and a single lamp that hummed softly in the corner. Rowan kept stealing glances at Harper, as though memorizing every detail she'd missed over the years. Harper pretended not to notice, but each look sent her heart stumbling. When Rowan finally thanked her for the meal, her voice held a softness that made Harper's chest ache. It was the same softness she used to hear when Rowan whispered goodnight after long days, when everything between them had felt effortless. Harper looked away, afraid her thoughts were becoming too visible. Rowan didn't press, but the emotion lingered between them like smoke. They moved back to the living area, and Rowan suggested they play a game to pass the time, anything to distract them from the relentless storm. Harper found an old deck of cards in a drawer, their edges worn and slightly bent from years of use. They sat cross-legged on the rug, knees brushing as they shuffled and dealt. The game started with joking competitiveness, both women accusing the other of cheating whenever the score shifted. But soon the teasing faded into quieter moments where Rowan's laughter softened and Harper's walls lowered just a little. Rowan looked genuinely happy, less guarded, more like the girl Harper had once fallen in love with. And Harper couldn't pretend she didn't feel something warming inside her. At one point, Harper reached across the deck to gather the fallen cards, and her fingers accidentally brushed Rowan's wrist. The touch was brief, but electric, sending a jolt up her arm that left her breathless. Rowan froze too, eyes lifting slowly to meet hers, and for a suspended moment neither of them said a word. The crackling fire filled the silence, casting a golden glow that made Rowan's eyes look impossibly warm. Harper swallowed hard, unsure whether to pull back or lean in. The moment stretched, fragile and full of possibility, until Rowan gently moved her hand away, soft, deliberate, respectful. The gesture made Harper's heart twist even more. The storm continued to rage outside, yet inside the cabin, something gentler began to take shape. Not reconciliation, not yet, but understanding. Harper could feel the shift in the air, in Rowan's tone, in the way they breathed a little easier around each other. Rowan was trying, not with grand declarations, but with small, steady pieces of effort that spoke louder than any apology. Harper wasn't ready to decide anything yet, but for the first time since arriving, she didn't want to run. She wanted to see where this fragile warmth might lead, once the storm finally calmed. And as they cleaned up the cards together, Harper realized something quietly terrifying. She wasn't afraid of Rowan anymore. She was afraid of wanting her again. Night settled slowly over the cabin, the storm still howling but losing some of its earlier fury. Harper lit a second lamp, warm gold spilling across the wooden walls, softening every shadow. Rowan sat on the edge of the couch, silently watching Harper move around the room with a pensive expression that bordered on longing. There was a tenderness in her gaze that Harper tried to ignore, but it found her anyway, settling deep under her skin. She pretended to check her phone again. Still no signal, still no escape, but the truth was she no longer felt trapped. Something inside her had shifted, gentle but undeniable. And as she met Rowan's eyes, she felt that shift deepen. Rowan finally broke the silence, her voice hesitant as she said Harper's name in a way that sounded like a confession all by itself. Harper stopped where she stood, hands resting on the back of a chair, bracing herself. Rowan asked if they could talk again. Really talk, but only if Harper wanted to. The care in her voice made Harper's chest tighten painfully. She nodded, and Rowan exhaled, relief softening her expression. They sat facing each other, close enough that Harper could feel Rowan's warmth. Rowan apologized, not for leaving, but for the fear that made her leave. She explained how she'd spent years regretting the silence she'd chosen, years wishing she had fought for them instead of running away. Harper listened quietly, every word carving itself into her heart. When Harper finally responded, her voice trembled with honesty she hadn't allowed herself in a long time. She admitted that she had loved Rowan deeply, so deeply that losing her had felt like losing a part of herself. She described the heartbreak, the unanswered questions, the nights she stayed awake wondering if Rowan ever thought about her. Rowan's eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. She took in every word as if they were truths she had been desperate to hear. Harper told her she didn't know if she could trust her again. Not yet, but she wanted to try. Saying it out loud made her feel both brave and terrified. Rowan reached out, then stopped halfway, waiting for permission. Harper gave a tiny nod. Their hands met slowly, as though touching too quickly would break the moment. When Rowan's fingers finally interlaced with Harper's, a warm ache spread through Harper's chest, an ache of familiarity, of comfort, of something she thought she'd lost forever. Rowan leaned closer, her voice no more than a breath as she promised that this time, she would stay. Not because circumstances forced her, not because of guilt, but because she still loved Harper and never stopped. Harper felt tears sting her eyes, a mixture of old wounds and new hope rising all at once. She didn't say the words back, not yet, but the way she squeezed Rowan's hand said enough. Rowan understood. She always did. Outside, the storm finally began to quiet, the wind losing its sharp edges and the snow falling more gently. Inside, the two women sat together on the couch, leaning into each other naturally, as if years hadn't passed between them. Harper rested her head on Rowan's shoulder, the closeness grounding and soft. Rowan wrapped an arm around her, careful, steady, not assuming, just offering. They watched the fire burn low, listened to the distant hush of the fading storm, and let the silence settle around them like a blanket. No demands, no rushing, just presence, just warmth. Harper realized she hadn't felt this safe in a very long time. Eventually, Harper whispered that maybe the storm had done them a favor, trapping them together long enough to face what they'd been avoiding. Rowan let out a soft laugh, agreeing that fate, or weather, had a strange sense of timing. She tilted her head slightly, brushing her cheek against Harper's hair, and Harper didn't pull away. For the first time since their breakup, the future didn't feel like a cliff edge. It felt like a path, uncertain, yes, but walkable. Together, if they were both brave enough. Harper whispered that she was willing to try, to start slow, to rebuild piece by piece. Rowan's breath caught, and Harper felt her smile against her hair. As the fire dimmed to glowing embers, Harper lifted her head and met Rowan's eyes, clear, hopeful, steady. Something new passed between them, something deeper than nostalgia and safer than longing, the possibility of loving each other again without the shadows of the past. Rowan moved closer, giving Harper all the time in the world to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met in a soft, tentative kiss, gentle as falling snow, warm as the fire beside them. It wasn't a grand reunion or a dramatic declaration. It was a beginning. When they finally parted, Harper rested her forehead against Rowan's, whispering that Christmas had a strange way of bringing people back where they belonged. And this time, she hoped they both knew exactly what they wanted.